The Wrath of the Iceni, the third story in the first series of the Fourth Doctor adventures from Big Finish, first released in two parts in March of 2012. The Fourth Doctor, played by Tom Baker, and his companion Leela, played by Louise Jameson, the Doctor is trying to give Leela a kind of history, a brief kind of history overview of humanity and just where ultimately her roots and where she came from and the like. But when they find themselves in 60 AD, they find themselves coming up against the famous Celtic queen Boudica, voiced by Ella Kenyon. It might be Ella Kenyon or Kenyon, I apologise. But as they kind of try and find a way to get out of there, Leela's viewpoint might be changing. I mean, as she says to the Doctor, these people need our help, and she finds herself relating very heavily with Boudica and bonding with her, although the Doctor knows that this is one area where they can't interfere. History has to be allowed to continue the way it is, and they can't interfere with it. And I actually think, with this pairing, this particular storyline is kind of brilliant. Like, okay, any of the other companions, I can't really see them kind of doing this. Most of them, I could see them probably respecting history, especially those that came from the 1960s through to the 2000s, or just came from normal humans. But with Leela, I can absolutely buy that she would feel like she bonds with Boudica and that she wants to be able to help her people. I feel like Leela is exactly that kind of person. They also meet other characters along the way, but the main one that they also interact with is a member of Boudica's tribe called Bragnar, voiced by Nia Roberts, who she's treated very much kind of at the time that women were seen as kind of the homemakers. They have to cook while the men go off to battle. But she doesn't want to see bloodshed. She just wants to come out of this alive. She doesn't necessarily want to kill people, but she understands that sometimes it has to be done, but she'd rather wouldn't. Now, I think that this story, I find if I could bear it to 3 or 4 Doctor Who stories from Big Finish and from the TV, I find it kind of incorporates elements from each of them. So I'm going to talk about each part and why I think it ultimately relates to this particular story. The first story I'd compare it to is one of the earliest Big Finish stories I saw. I think it might even be one of the first Big Finish stories, The Sirens of Time. That's the crossover story with Peter Davison, Colin Baker, and Sylvester McCoy. And the main reason I bring it up is because I felt very much the same hearing Tom Baker in this, in that with The Sirens of Time, I felt specifically with Colin Baker, but for the first few minutes at least, I could hear kind of his age, like in the sense that with a lot of these Big Finish stories, especially with Paul McGann, those Doctors can just slip back into the role like it's a glove. Whereas with Colin Baker, it took me a little bit of time before my ears became accustomed to hearing his voice again. You definitely hear the kind of age in his voice. There has been some years since he played the Doctor. The thing is, I kind of felt the same here with Tom Baker. Once again, I think with Tom Baker and Louise Jameson here, it took me a little while just to get accustomed because it has been a little while since they played the Doctor and Leela. I mean, this was March 2012, so Tom Baker would have been 78 and Louise Jameson would just have been entering her 60s. So you can definitely hear that time has come for their voices. But then once they get going, once again, they go back into this like a glove. I mean, as I said, it's not immediate like I heard with Sylvester McCoy or Paul McGann, but once they get going, yeah, you can tell this is the Doctor and Leela. The second story that I'd really compare this to is the Seventh Doctor story, Colditz. And the main reason I compare it to this is, in this case, while there are, of course, small sci-fi elements, like any story involving time travel would, they don't play much of a fiddle here because it's just history. I mean, the Doctor and their companion coming across some people who actually existed in history that actually happened, and then just trying to live through it. I mean, it was the same with Colditz trying to survive the regime, shall we say. I said in my review of Colditz that I really didn't want to say this word on YouTube, just out of respect or like. But once again, knowing that Boudica was actually a person that happened in history and everything they had to go through, it really does feel like this is a terrible set of events that characters are just going to have to deal with. Now, I should have done this before, but I'll give a quick kind of summary of what happened with Boudica for those who maybe don't know. Boudica existed, like with this story, in around 60 AD or such. Her husband, who had been a Celtic king, Prasutagus, something like that, he eventually died, and Roman law, which was prevalent in England at the time, said that she would get everything, half of his kingdom and the like. Half of it would go to her and half of it would go to Rome. However, the Romans, particularly Nero, I think, decided, now we want the entire lot, so they came and took the lot. However, Boudica wouldn't stand for this and eventually fought back against the Romans, pushing them back for a large portion of time, including where most of this story takes place in Camulodunum, which would eventually become Colchester. And however, she was eventually defeated at the Battle of Watling Street, kind of several years later. They were surrounded by Romans and they fought them back to a defeat. However, Boudica didn't want her or her daughters to become slaves of the Roman Empire, so she subsequently poisoned her daughters and then poisoned herself, feeling that she would rather die and be free than live as a slave. Which I do actually think is rather good and, well, rather noble, but at the same time it's very sad to hear. And that kind of brings me on to the last game of story that I would compare this particular one to. And that, of course, is the fires of Pompeii and the waters of Mars. Like, as I said with Colditz, it's the Doctor and their companions just having to live through some rather dour times, and as the Doctor said in Fires of Pompeii and the Wars of Mars, this stuff actually happened. Everything has to happen this way. Even though Boudica tries to coerce the Doctor into revealing secrets to her that she might change her fate and ultimately come out victorious, he ultimately gives her false information, and they have to allow history to run its course. And even Leela, by the end of the story, feels like, I don't want to see all this bloodshed anymore. I can't deal with this, which the Doctor says, I think your education might be progressing. So, yeah. As I said, I don't think it's the best Big Finish story I've done, but as I said, it took me a little while, once again, to get used to Tom Baker and Louise Jameson, as it has been a little while kind of hearing them on the air, definitely since the 70s, but I do think this is a good story. It's the first Fourth Doctor story I've listened to, so I'd say definitely give The Wrath of the Iceni a listen through if you haven't already. That's my quick little review on the Fourth Doctor's Big Finish story, The Wrath of the Iceni. Give it a listen. Anyway, until next time, see ya.